Good morning. I am Sahana from Case 23, and today I will be presenting this topic, which is a very important and a basic topic in forensic science, that is the 7S of crime scene investigation, which basically helps us in managing and processing crime scenes. So I've typed out a little quote here. The devil is in the details, and in crime scene investigation, those details can make all the difference. That simply translates to how important it is to give attention to details, as that is what a forensic scientist should be doing. So, moving on to the first slide, I will be discussing the important steps or the stages or what the 7S refers to in the aspect of crime scene investigation. Let's begin with what exactly is crime scene investigation. So, crime scene investigation can be simply defined as the process of collecting, documenting, and analyzing physical evidences or any other sort of evidences that you would typically find in a crime scene, including biological evidences, serological evidences. Evidences could be of any nature for that matter, those that are found at a crime scene, analysis and interpretation of those evidences, with the ultimate goal of coming to a conclusion basically, that is aiding in the process of investigation, reconstruction, wherein there are certain cases where crime scene reconstruction is required, and prosecution of crimes while ensuring the integrity and legal admissibility of the evidence in the court of law. Moving on to the next slide. So, why and what is the purpose of crime scene investigation? Since physical evidence is objective and is unbiased, and you cannot be influenced by some personal opinions given by any sort of professionals, or again, we cannot take emotions into consideration here. So, there has to be some scientifically authentic and authorized method or a procedure through which conclusions can be given to a particular crime. So that part is played by the CSI, which is crime scene investigation. Crime scenes again are unique, and CSI helps to capture and analyze the various different characteristics of each scene. CSI also aids in justice and plays a critical role in ensuring justice and is served by providing accurate and reliable evidence. So, CSI is something that is more reliable and legally admissible. And let's answer a simple multiple choice question here, which is who is typically responsible for conducting a crime scene investigation? Now that we discussed what CSI is, the answer is quite self explanatory. So let's just still answer option A, police officer, option B, forensic scientist, option C, detective, option D, crime scene investigator. From the name itself, the answer is quite clear, which is a crime scene is investigated by a crime scene investigator. Let's move on to the next slide. Again, talking of this, these are some of the quotes or liners that are given by some very famous personalities in the field of forensic science. I have put a little bit of insights of very famous personalities in the field of forensic science who have given these quotes or one liners. You could just read it through. Crime scene investigation is not just about collecting evidence, it is also about telling a story. The story of what happened, how it happened, and who was involved. This was given by Dr. Henry Lee. Slide. We have the very first S in the 7S of CSI. The first S stands for securing the crime scene. The word itself indicates that it is something that is done to protect the scene. Let's dive into what it exactly means. Securing the scene ensures the integrity of the evidence and prevents any sort of contamination or destruction to the crime scene. So, if we initially start talking about securing the crime scene, it basically ensures the integrity of the evidence and also prevents any sort of contamination in the crime scene. So basically, securing the crime scene primarily involves usage of barricading tapes, basically barricading the crime scene. The tapes that we usually encounter which says crime scene do not cross. Those are the ones that are typically used in this stage. Basically, you are restricting the entry and securing that particular area where you are not allowing any other people to enter. So, this again is a very important aspect as it is the first stage of crime scene investigation. This involves isolating the area, restricting any sort of access, like I've mentioned, protecting fragile evidences. So the first responding officer, whoever, is the one entering the crime scene or encountering the crime scene firsthand. So it's his or her duty to secure the crime scene by limiting access to the scene and also preserving scene with minimal contamination. Let's talk about this with an example where there is a victim who is still alive in the crime scene, and in such a case, it is the duty of the first responding officer to immediately call for medical assistance and help in order to first preserve life. And the second priority would be preservation of the evidence. As we all know, the Locard's principle of exchange, which was given by Edmund Locard, which states that every contact leaves a trace. Talk about the duties of the first responding officer. He or she is responsible for safely securing the safety of the individuals in the scene, approaching scene cautiously, looking, listening, attention to all the details there, obtaining medical attention for anyone injured, like I've mentioned again, and calling for any sort of backup if required. As of this crime scene would be separating the witnesses. So if when we talk about witnesses, witnesses are the people or those category of individuals who had actually witnessed the crime or seen the crime with their eyes or have been present where the crime has occurred. So separating the witness prevents from influencing each other's statements or contaminating the evidence. So basically there is a chance of the witnesses when they talk to each other, there might be misinterpretation of the information and there might not be very authentic information coming out when they are questioned or interrogated. So there is a possibility of something called a collusion, which simply means a story that is made up by the witnesses when they are talking to each other or as a result of them talking to each other. So in order to prevent that, separating the witness is a very important step. So basically, this step involves identifying and isolating witnesses. Again, identifying witnesses is very critical. You can ask various questions such as what have you seen or where were you when you were in the crime scene? What peculiar things have you observed? Or what were certain things, certain state of the environment? Let's say it was an indoor crime scene, if the fans were switched on or switched off, if the lights were switched on or switched off, if the door was open or closed. Such details are important and have to be paid attention to. An initial statement should be taken, it can be recorded, it can be written. So, all these have to be followed. Providing separate areas for witness interviews. Again, like I said, isolating the witnesses would also simply mean separating the witnesses for different interviews where every witness is questioned separately and interrogated separately. Third S stands for scanning the crime scene. So, this again is an important step. Every step has equal importance. So, this step basically talks about the initial walkthrough of the investigator or the first responding officer in the crime scene. He or she would first take a walk around in the crime scene to, analyze and interpret what kind of evidences or where the potential area, what are the potential areas where evidences could be found, and which involves identifying potential evidence, noting any hazardous or safety concerns. Let's say there is some contaminant or a chemical that is present in the crime scene, which is hazardous even if you touch or even if you smell. So, in such cases, an initial walkthrough would eradicate such confusion whether you have to, be prepared to face that particular evidence. So, that will only come after scanning the crime scene. That understanding, to gain such understanding, you will have to scan the crime scene first. Also, scanning the crime scene can help you identify and determine where to take photos, where to, the primary, determining the primary crime scene, if it's a primary crime scene or a secondary crime scene. Let's say there was a dead dead body found in the crime scene, and that wherever the crime has occurred would be considered as the primary crime scene. And let's say the accused moved the body to another location. The other location where the body is now kept would be considered as the secondary crime scene. So, in order to identify which is the primary crime scene and which is the secondary crime scene, scanning the crime scene would play an important role in that particular aspect. The fourth S in the 7S of the crime scene investigation is seeing the crime scene, which is again a detailed version of scanning the crime scene. It is a more detailed examination compared to scanning the crime scene, which was the previous S that we've just discussed. And this step basically involves documenting the crime scene through photographs and notes. So you can perform note making and capture photographs from various angles, from various ranges, including close range, mid range, far range, basically capturing the evidences by placing a measuring tape right beside it and capturing it through various angles in order to capture various details about the evidence. And the next thing that will would be involved in seeing the crime scene is identifying and prioritizing evidence. Again, this again helps us understand the evidentiary value of each and every evidence. You know, there is certain type of evidences where, for example, let's say there's a biological evidence present and a physical evidence present. Biological evidence, let's say a pool of blood is present and a knife is present. So the first priority would be given to the biological evidence because it's something that would degrade fast than a physical evidence, which is a knife. So in that aspect, this would help in understanding which evidence to be prioritized first. And then seeing the crime scene also helps in developing a theory of the crime scene. Again, further useful in crime scene reconstruction if required. These documentation where photographs are taken would also aid in crime scene reconstruction. And it also helps in producing a testimony in the court where photographs are a must. So, moving on to the next step or the next S of the crime scene investigation, which is sketching the crime scene. So, the sketching of the crime scene again is a very crucial and an important stage, as it is basically a pictorial representation of the crime scene that is manually drawn by the investigator or a forensic sketching artist who is who is specialized in that particular field. So, sketching the crime scene involves creating a detailed diagram. So, basically, we are using pictorial representations or geometrical figures in order to represent the location of crimes, location of evidences in the crime scene, location of corpus delicti, location of various other reference points in the crime scene. So, when we talk of sketching the crime scene, there are two different types of sketches, a rough sketch and a final sketch. So, we will talk why is sketching important before we go into the types of sketches. So, sketching is important to document the layout of the crime scene. It shows the location of the evidence, like I've already mentioned, and it provides a permanent record of the scene. So, basically, the documentation also includes sketching, photographs, sketches, note making. These all act as a permanent record of the crime scene. So, moving on to the types of sketches. Initially, we will start with the rough sketch. The word itself explains what the purpose of it is. So basically, it is a draft or a presentation. Basically, involves all the information and measurements at the crime scene. And this particular rough sketch is idealized to make a permanent sketch or a final sketch. So this sketch is drawn at the crime scene itself. All the measurements from the evidence, the locations. Let's say it's an indoor crime scene where the bed is situated, where the corpus delicti or the dead body is situated in the room, where the fans are located. So a rough sketch is something that is done in the initial part of the crime scene investigation, where the sketching artist is in the crime scene and he or she draws the sketch in the crime scene itself. It is an on-site drawing. We will now talk about the final sketch. So this final sketch is a precise rendering of the crime scene or a precise representation of the crime scene, usually drawn to scale. There are scaled measurements that are taken into consideration in a final sketch, whereas a rough sketch would not take those into consideration. So a finished sketch must reflect information contained within the rough sketch in order to be admissible evidence in a courtroom. Again, this acts as a permanent record, and a final sketch is something that is done later, and it is a more accurate copy of the rough sketch, and it is used in the court proceedings. And computer programs can also be used in order to develop these permanent or final sketches for that matter. And these final sketches should include the directions again: north, south, east, and west. And scale should be involved, the dimensions of all the rooms, all the landscapes should be involved, date, location, name of the officer or investigator again. So now we shall be talking of methods of sketching. There are various methods of sketching again. There are basically four different types of methods that are used for sketching. So the first method is namely triangulation method. From the name itself, you could say that it is in a form of a triangle. So there are two certain points or reference points, or let's say fixed points, taken in this particular method. So there are two different points in this particular slide that I've put here, A and B. So the distance between this is already known. Let's say X and Y are two different evidences in the crime scene, and the distance is measured from point A to point Y, or the evidence, point A to the object, point B to the object, and this where the intersection points of these both lines would determine the location of the evidence. So by using these measurements, the location of the object can be determined by drawing two arcs from the reference points, that is A and B. Let's say we are drawing a thin line from A and a line from B to the object Y, and the point of intersection will be established as the location of the evidence. So this is basically triangulation method. If you read out the point here, there are two fixed points are selected, that is A and B. Measure the distance between them. Between A and B, the distance is measured, and now measure the distance to the objects in the crime scene. The object in the crime scene is again namely X and Y. Let's say if you are measuring the distance from X to the reference points, from A to X you will draw a line, from B to X you will draw another line, and that particular distance or where the that intersection point will be determined as the location of the evidence, that is X. Measure the distance to the object in the scene from each of these 2 points. A and B are fixed points and X and Y are the points in the object. The next method of sketching that we will be discussing about is the baseline method. So in this particular method, there are two fixed points that are selected again, just like the previous method, A and B. So in this method, a reference point is taken. Let's say a wall or any other sturdy object, for example, a cupboard, is taken as a baseline, and from the baseline, the object distance is measured, or the evidence distance is measured. So the baseline acts as the reference line for all the evidences that we will be measuring in this type of sketching method. So two fixed points are selected and the objects are measured along the line between the points at right angles to the line. So basically, we will consider the objects at right angles to the baseline, perpendicular to the baseline. Now, walls or tape measures along the ground walk. Well, A and B make the fixed line, and X and Y are the objects in the crime scene. Similar to the picture that we have referred to before, it's the same representation. A and B are reference points, X and Y are evidences here. So, in the baseline method, these measurements are then used to create a scale, a permanent sketch or a final sketch of the drawing. So the next method that we will be talking about is the polar coordinate method in sketching again. So this is basically used for large outdoor crime scenes, or crime scenes of larger landscape. Here, instead of drawing the coordinates, the distances and directions of the evidentiary objects or the evidences are noted with reference to a center focal point. So in this particular method, there's a central focal point from which the other evidences are measured. So the points are recorded on the sketches accordingly. So the measurements are then used to create a scale drawing or a final sketch of the crime scene. Talking about the last method of sketching is a cross projection sketching, or a method. In this method, where the physical evidences are found on roof or walls, etc., it's basically a two-dimensional sketch of the crime scene, where let's say there are two or three floors in consideration of the crime scene, and in such a crime scene, the cross projection method involves creating a two-dimensional drawing of the crime scene by projecting measurements from two or more reference points. So there is not just one reference point or a baseline or two different points that we have observed in previous methods. So there are either 2 points or more than 2 points. This method is useful for sketching complex crime scenes or scenes with multiple levels or multiple floors. So all four walls and the roof fold out and extended flat on the floor. This is an example where we've considered a room or a house with the living room, two different rooms. This is the sofa. So all measurements with respect to the evidence are found on the walls, windows, doors or roof are taken from each corner of the floor, wall and roof. So this is also called as extended coordinate method since we are going beyond a single room. We are trying to give in more details, bring in more details in one particular or one single sketch. So that is how this cross projection method is done. Moving on to our next S of the crime scene, where we will talk about searching of the crime scene. So searching for the crime scene simply means searching for evidences that have evidentiary value. So in searching of crime scene, this involves searching for evidence through a systematic procedure, and this would involve identifying and collecting physical evidences, documenting the location and condition of the evidence, how the particular exact state of the evidence at the present moment, and usage of specialized techniques such as DNA fingerprinting or analysis or DNA profiling can be followed out in this particular stage. And now there are various types of search patterns that are used to identify. um, so the first method we will be talking about is grid pattern. So in grid line search pattern, it is a systematic search pattern where the crime scene is divided into a grid of squares or rectangles. So the crime scene investigator would systematically examine each square or rectangle, usually in a left to right manner or top to bottom manner. So there's a start point from which the investigator will be starting to move. I will be moving the cursor in the way the investigator will be moving. So from the start point, he will be moving in this parallel directions, forming a grid-like pattern. So basically, this crime scene search can be used in cases where there are a lot of evidences in the crime scene. Let's say the concentration of evidences are very high in every corner of the room. In such cases, grid pattern is quite applicable. And the next method or next search pattern that we will be talking about is a spiral search method. So this particular method is used either when the evidences are concentrated in the center of the crime scene. Let's say we are considering a living room. At the living room, in the center of the crime scene, I find a corpus delicti, a dead body, a knife, a blood pool, hair samples, nails. So let's say the evidences are quite concentrated in the center of the crime scene. In such cases, spiral method can be used, wherein the investigator will be moving in a spiral fashion, a search pattern where the searcher begins at the outer edge of the crime scene and spirals inward, examining area in a continuous curved path. So in that particular movement of the crime scene investigator, he or she will be finding evidences and considering them for the investigation. So the next method that we will be considering is the zonal method. So a zone simply translates to also a quadrant method. Zonal method is also called as a quadrant method, and it involves usage of one or more different patterns of search methods. So a search pattern where the crime scene is divided into separate zones. So initially this crime scene is first initially divided into an equal quadrants, 1, 2 and 3, or 4 quadrants for that matter, and it is divided into 4 separate zones or areas, and each zone is systematically searched by a different searcher or a team. Let's say it is a larger area and there are 4 investigating officers. So each person will be investigating each zone. Zone 1 will be investigated by person A, zone 2 will be investigated by person B, namely 3 and 4. So in that particular case, person A can use a different method to analyze or search that particular zone, and person 2 can use another different method to search that particular area. Let's say I'm using a spiral method for zone 1, and another investigator is using grid pattern here, and that is totally how this method is comprised of. So let's talk about the next method, which is the wheel method. So in the wheel method, we will be discussing on how the investigating officer moves from his place. So, a search pattern where multiple searchers radiate outward from a central point, examining the area in a circular pattern. So, basically, there are one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, 8 investigating officers standing in the circumference of a circle, and they will be moving inward, investigating their particular area. So, and they will be coming to a particular point in the center, which will be their meeting point again. They will be starting outward, coming towards the center of the circle. So, a wheel search pattern where multiple searchers radiate outward from a central point, examining the area in a circular pattern, like we've discussed. So, the next pattern for the searching is a line method. So, a line method simply means a search pattern where the forensic responder or the crime scene investigator examines the area in a straight line, usually parallel to each other, usually in a left to right or a top to bottom manner. It is again similar to grid pattern, but it is either done in any one of the fashion. Either it is done in from left to right or top to bottom. So that is about the line method. So the last method of crime scene search pattern that we will be discussing today is a link method. So this link method is a very simple method where the investigator moves from one evidence to another evidence and links from one evidence to the other. So a search pattern where searchers examine the area by moving from one specific point to another. It does not have to be an orderly or a systematic procedure. It can be a disordered method if you can categorize it under that category of organized and unorganized. This would fall under the unorganized category because there is no particular fashion that the investigator will have to follow. He or she can go as they wish to according to the evidences present at the crime scene. So these search patterns are used to ensure a thorough and systematic examination of the crime scene and to help locate and document physical evidences. So additionally, each search pattern has its own advantages and disadvantages if we will have to discuss about that, and the choice of which pattern to use depends on the specific circumstances of the particular crime scene. So the last S of the 7S of the crime scene investigation is scene evidence collection. When we talk about this particular topic, securing and packaging evidence fall under this category. Basically, packaging of the evidences, collection of the evidences simply mean properly collecting and packaging the evidence, labeling and documenting the evidence, transporting evidence to secure facility for the analysis or a forensic science laboratory for analysis. So basically, evidence needs to be properly packaged, sealed and labeled. Liquids and arson should be stored in airtight containers or unbreakable containers. Let's talk of different types of evidences and how they would be potentially collected and packaged. So biological evidences, they will be stored in breathable containers for evidence to dry out in order to reduce mold growth or any sort of bacterial growth or fungal growth. That would simply destroy the evidence and destruct its evidentiary value. So in order to prevent such things, proper packaging and collection is a very important aspect. Biological evidences again needs to dry out. Let's say you're collecting fresh blood. First we'll be swabbing the blood and then air dry it and then further package it. So that air drying process is quite important because any presence of moisture will lead to bacterial growths or microbial growth which will hinder our analysis. So it has to be stored in a paper bindle, usually a druggist fold, placed in plastic or paper containers. Let's say hair samples are found, you can collect them in a druggist fold. Nails can be collected in a druggist fold. Is later sealed, and all the evidences that are packed should have the signature and details of the evidence, who has collected it, when has it been collected, and what is the nature of the evidence. So all these help in maintaining the chain of custody again. So an evidence log and a chain of custody document must be attached to the evidence container. Evidence log should contain case, inventory, description of the evidence, name of the suspect, name of the victim, date and time of collection, date and time of recovery, same thing, and signature of the person recovering evidence, signature of any witness present during the investigation. So in conclusion, Crime scene investigation is a critical component of any criminal investigations, and the 7S of the crime scene investigation process not only provides how to manage and process the crime scene, but also helps one understand the important stages in the crime scene. So effective crime scene search patterns like we've discussed include grid pattern, spiral method, zonal method, wheel method, line method, link method, namely, and are essential for thorough coverage of the crime scene. Next, by combining the 7S of crime scene investigation with effective search patterns, investigators can ensure that crime scenes are thoroughly searched and all the physical evidences are located and documented. Also, thank you all for your attention, and I hope this presentation has provided a comprehensive understanding on what each S of the 7S included, and as I hope it provided valuable insights into the world of crime scene investigation. Thank you.